Hello, everybody. Welcome to Social Selling Hour on this October 13th. Not Friday the 13th, but October 13th. It seems to be a holiday there up north of us in Canada, as well as a holiday here in the U.S., but hopefully everybody's either enjoying a day off or taking an hour break to enjoy our first panel on Social Selling Hour. So Rachel and I are excited to have a panel discussion, so it's not just the two of us picking on one person. We are finally outnumbered. How are you this afternoon, Rachel?
I'm great. Happy Monday, everyone.
All right. So today we're going to introduce our panelists. Actually, we're kind of lucky. We've had the who's who for our lineup of guests for our previous 21 social selling hours. So yeah, I said this is the 22nd social selling hour. As crazy as that sounds, and our three panelist guests are actually previous guests of our community, and really are part of the reason we've been able to build such a robust community, because we've been able to have such awesome guests on here. So we're going to go ahead and start with John on an introduction, but I'm going to kind of throw them an extra question there. So I want them to give their first memory of their first sell, or first sale that they can think of that when it comes back to their first memory. So John, we'll go with you, then Dave, and then Barb, you'll go third. So go ahead, John.
All right, thanks, Brian. Social selling, good selling, great to be here. My name is John Golden. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Pipeliner CRM. I used to run Huthwaite Spin Selling, one of the world's leading sales performance improvements organizations. Written a couple of books, blog a bit, and generally try and help people to be more successful with their business. First sale, well, I'll tell you, one of the first significant or major sales that springs to mind for me was about 12 years ago when I was in Silicon Valley, 12 or 14 years ago, and I was doing some work with a rather large software company whose name I won't mention, but they were Seattle-based. And I discovered, one of the things I discovered was that managers at that organization at the time could sign a deal up to $100,000 without it having to go above them. So one of the deal I remember is that it came in at 99,000 and change. Our proposal won that deal, and I learned after things you always figure out is how much signing authority people have, and make sure your deals come in under it.
That's a good one. Those are all, and especially those, Seattle-based companies. The hoops you have to jump through can always be entertaining. All right, Dave, welcome.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here live on video. You guys are doing a great job, Brian and Rachel. I find myself moving other events around so I can join you on Monday afternoons here, 4 o'clock East Coast time. So I founded and was CEO of ES Research Group from 2005 till March of last year, and we were kind of the Gartner of sales training. We compared and contrasted sales training companies like Huthwaite, fine company that they are, and about 40 others. And corporate sales training buyers came to us to help them win their way through the very complex decision process of selecting and recruiting and engaging with the right company. Presently, people think I'm retired, but I'm far from that. I write the regular sales training column for Sales and Marketing Management magazine, and I'm on their content advisory board as well. I invest small technology companies, helping them to sell more effectively. I'm also a backstage sales strategist for larger companies, helping them figure out how to win very, very big deals. These are deals that are, well, way north of $20 million, and in some cases much, much higher than that. The next thing that I do is I make an annual trip to Ireland, where, of course, John comes from, and I work with, I run a series of workshops for smaller Irish companies that are looking to sell internationally. I work with the CEOs and sales executives. And the last thing I'm doing, but not the least, is I'm in the depths of writing yet another book, which will be out in 2015. So I'm pretty excited about that. My first sale, I remember it well. It was a $5,000 upgrade to an existing customer when I joined this Salesforce a number of years ago for an accounts payable module. The whole system was perhaps $25,000, and I got $5,000 for it. I can't say I made my number for the year with that small piddling amount, but it was pretty thrilling. So that was quite a while back.
All right. Yeah, that sounds good. Barb, welcome.
Hey guys, it's great to be back here with you again today. I really appreciate the opportunity. Of course, I'm in great company with all four of you, so this is going to be a lot of fun today. I'm Barb Giamanco, and I own a company called Social Centered Selling. Also happen to be the author of a book that I published related to social selling 4 years ago. I had published by a publisher called The New Handshake, Sales Meets Social Media. So pretty active in the world of social and how that impacts sales. So having a great time with that. My first sale, well, I'm going to go way back into the memory banks. My first sale was when I sold my first babysitting job, and I convinced them that I was 13 and not 11, and that I could handle the opportunity. So, you know, I've been a long-time salesperson, starting with babysitting and on to newspaper routes, and then I got my first job in a retail store, and it just kind of grew from there when I got into the technology world. So that's me.
Welcome. So that's actually pretty good. It's funny you say that. Jeff Sheehan just posted on Twitter that his first one was being a paper boy, and that was also my first one. As I remember, my family owned an ice cream shop growing up, but we didn't get that till I was 14. So at 13, I remember helping out with the local paper. So what about you, Rachel? What was your first one? And do your intro, since I usually skip over and don't give you the ability to share what you do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chief Listener at Pipeliner CRM, and my first sale, it would probably, I'm going to go with Barb's answer in babysitting. I started that super young, and it was to a neighbor family, and I think they agreed to pay me a lot more than was the going way. Negotiate well, so I remember that distinctly. It was my win as a small child, upping it by 25 cents.
So that works well for you. So I was the opposite. I was managing an ice cream store, and I could pretty much at the beach. So I could be persuaded to give free toppings out without ever, I was not a good negotiator. If someone just wanted to ask for an extra topping, I was not I had to learn quickly. So we have a panel discussion today. I'm excited. We had a wonderful kind of kickoff call. I think it was last week or the week before for this panel, and I think we could have talked on for about 2.5 hours on that call alone, just on the wealth of knowledge. So I'm going to do my best to shut up as much as I can, which I know is rare for me being on camera. But thanks, Rachel. Yes. But so we're going to jump into question one. So the basis of this discussion is really talking. We have lots of great guests, lots of information being shared on social selling, relationships, power of community, lots of different elements there. But really, when it comes back to it, we're going to kind of circle this all back to what makes good sales, makes good selling to begin with. So that first question, what are the elements of a good sales strategy? And maybe, John, you can go ahead and kick us off with the first answer there, and then anyone else can jump in as we go.
Yeah, I think the elements of a good sales strategy, for me, they're pretty fundamental, and it kind of starts with obviously knowing your customer or your target buyer. Then knowing what's going on in their market segment, what's going on in their business, and really being able to map the product or service you have and see whether you can bring value or benefit to those business issues, either the company-based ones or the vertical-based ones. But I think it all really begins with knowing your target buyer really well, because a lot of people jump in and develop a sales strategy without ever really defining who their target customer really is and what their target customer cares about.
Well, John, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm just going to go ahead and take Brian's lead and jump right in. Couldn't agree with you more, and especially I think you and I are like mine, all three of us, really. That also applies when you're thinking about social. It becomes even more important to make sure that you understand the characteristics of that target buyer. It seems odd that we have to tell people that, but I can't tell you how many times I've been at a speaking engagement and I ask people to describe, who their audience is, and it's basically anybody with a pulse. Well, it's not. And so you have to get really focused and then ensure that you're focusing the right person, which then I think drives the message It's going to drive the process. It's going to drive what social channels you choose to engage in, and so on. So I think that's a great place for us to get started.
Yeah, so, and I think the three of us do think alike in terms of the experience that we've had in the sales area. I'll be a little more clinical, just to not contradict, but just give another perspective. When I look at a sales strategy, I actually look at 4 parts. Once you have a qualified opportunity, a deep assessment of your potential customer, how they run their business, what business they're in, who are their customers, who are their suppliers, who are their competitors, and getting that understanding of what value you can bring. So that's the situation assessment part. Once you have that, then I guess it's time to formulate a sales objective. I'm going to sell them X dollars of XYZ product by such and such a date. So a very specific, we know the term SMART sales objective. Once you have that, then you formulate one or more strategies. There's a value strategy. There's an executive access strategy. If you deal with partners, there's a partner strategy. There's a political strategy. There are numbers of strategies that you're going to formulate and execute through the 4th part, and that is the tactics. So I look at successful selling is situation assessment, the objective setting, the strategy setting, and the execution of tactics. So a little more clinical, but it's worked for me.
No, that's great, and I think that's a really good way to start off this call, where we're really talking about personas, some more broad range thinking, as well as kind of the idea of I was at Infusionsoft, a company here in Chandler, Arizona, that does social selling. They do CRM software as well as some startup social selling, pretty much selling across the board. And it was really neat. They have a really nice open culture, and they have large, and I say large, like 8 feet tall. Cereal boxes that had buyer personas on it, and they actually move those buyer personas on, and they actually act out how people engage with each of the different sales personas on their football field that's in the middle of their facility, which I thought was a great way of really not only visualizing that, but showing the importance of it. They were investing in these big cutouts of these buyer personas, which I thought was really neat. So jumping into question 2. How does your customer buy, and why is that so important? I think that's a great question that I'm sure we can kind of jump in there. We'll let ladies go first this time. So Barb,
how do customers buy?
So yeah, how do they buy, and why is it important? Why is it important for us to understand why they buy, or on that side?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is the way that people are buying today is they're starting the sales process without salespeople. Right? So they're choosing when they know they have a business problem, something they need to correct in their organization. Then it's either a few individuals, a team of people, but they are going online and they're starting to do their initial homework and research. Starting with the company's own website, which is what's kind of interesting is often you will have B2B sellers in complex environments arguing that that's not happening in their world, but it is. I mean, there's so much information that a company can use to vet a short list of vendors. So that's important because if you understand that, you realize that you need to make sure, both from a company and a personal selling perspective, that you have strong presence, that you're compelling, that you're using content, you're using ways to kind of engage and help, hopefully educate, because if buyers are looking for you and you're not found, or what they find doesn't really tell them much about the results that they'll receive when they work with you, then you have a serious problem because they're going to move on. And so I think, Brian, also what people need to recognize is they could be losing opportunities without even realizing it.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Looking at how customers buy, I just want to say I think 2008 was the pivot point where customers finally got control over their buying process, as opposed to all of us who were in sales training up to that point talking about how to control the customer, how to get them to align with your selling process. It happened because of the economic downfall, and I think I know at least a number of them, but I think a lot more boards of directors sat around going, going, okay, we're not going to be able to increase revenue this year. We'll be lucky if we could sustain what we did last year, or even only dip 10 or 20%. We have to be profitable, so let's do what Walmart did. Let's squeeze our vendors. So that started in 2008, and all of a sudden you had procurement and sourcing and purchasing become a strategic part of a corporation rather than just merely a tactical one. And I think that now, looking at the way buyers buy, we really have to take into account the fact that that whole thing has been switched around. So we have to provide them with what they need in order to get their job done, not only from a business plan perspective, but from a purchasing or procurement perspective. Trying to fight them, trying to control them, trying to make them follow your lead as opposed to you following theirs, I think is a recipe for not making your number.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that, and I think on both points that Dave and Barb have made here, because when I look at it, why is it important to know your buyer? It's funny, a lot of conversations I've had over the last year or two with organizations with large sales teams is when you do ask them, do you know how your buyer buys? And they'll often say, yes, absolutely. And then I'll ask them, okay, well, when's the last time you actually did any research into that, or you talked to them about their buying process? And they'll go, oh, and eventually a lot of them will admit that they really haven't had that conversation or done that research with their customer lately. And I always advise them that that's the starting point, because you may be pleasantly surprised and validated that their buying process is the same as it always has been. I think that's highly unlikely, but you never know. But you certainly may be surprised and shocked about how they are executing their buying process, and then look at your own sales process and you suddenly find the two are completely misaligned. So that's why it's incredibly important, and I think that every organization would do themselves a favor if it even went to their current customers, their most recent customers or whatever, and actually ask them to walk them through the process that they went through when they were buying and selecting them, and then go back and look at their sales process and say, wow, are we actually aligned here?
No, I think that's important. I think, and that's part of I have a blog post that I just finished that'll be out tomorrow. But it's the concept. The idea is feedback. People have been asking for feedback. They've been asking for customer input, and today the amount of data that we have by simply listening to not only what they're doing but what they're not doing is a very powerful amount of information that we can gain, that we always begged for this information before in the non-connected environment. And I put a tweet out there because I know when we had David Meerman Scott on, it was a big thing that we should treat the customer like a smarter customer today than they were back before. And I think that's kind of to your point, Dave, is like times have changed. There's more information available, and I think that's important. I think you guys, not only understanding the customer has changed, but really where the customer is at is definitely an exciting but different way of thinking for sure.
Just one other point there. I remember for years and years, and Barb and John will certainly know this. We taught salespeople how to, if you got an RFP, a request for proposal, how to get out of it, how to convince the customer, hey, I'm not gonna respond unless you allow me to meet with the CEO. All these tricks and tips and strategies. If you try to do that now, most companies will throw you out. If they're going to buy through a formal procurement process like a request for proposal, you're either going to have to do it or go look for another prospect. Generally, once in a while, you may be able to forestall doing it, but that's just an example of how much things have changed over the years.
I completely agree. We're getting some great tweets from the community. I just want to call out one in particular for question 2 from Victor. He said, listening is very important, and I think he's spot on. A lot of companies do not take the time to listen and truly find out where their customers are, where they're buying, because like John said, they are changing. You must stay up to date, and listening, particularly social listening, is a really important step. So thank you for the tweet, Victor. And it's a nice segue also into question 3. I'm pretty vocal about my thoughts on social selling. And there's been a lot of articles recently, so I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on what is social selling. Is it just a fancy term for marketing? are we forgetting traditional sales skills in lieu of taking everything on social?
Okay. I mean, I have a strong point of view on it. Obviously, I mean, I did just like Barb. I wrote a book on it, but I always do stress to people, and this is something that Dave has been very vocal about, and I agree. Is it goes back, and not to harp on, but it goes back about to knowing your customers. Like if you try to social sell to a customer who doesn't leverage social media, maybe they have restrictions like some financial services do, like some people where there's compliance issues. Then obviously that's a bit stupid, right? And you obviously need to use other tactics. However, I will say that in most cases, when you look at your buyer, you'll realize that they're leveraging online resources and social networks in the way that consumers have traditionally bought, and that's becoming part of the B2B process. So it really behooves you to align with that. But I do firmly believe that if you don't have fundamental selling skills and fundamental listening skills, questioning skills, research skills, all the things that have made up or have gone into making up the best salespeople over the last number of years, going online or social selling is not going to solve that issue for you. You're still going to come up short, because even if it's in a virtual environment, you still have to have good questioning, good listening skills. You have to hone in on the right person, and you have to know how to deliver value, but perhaps it's delivering it in a bit of a different way than traditionally. But again, it comes back to having fundamental selling skills and just executing them in perhaps a different way online.
Well, amen to that, John. Right? Because, the first thing I want to say is, to me, Rachel, no, selling and marketing are not the same thing. They need to work together. There's absolutely no question about that. And so social media marketing is not the same, approach that you're taking as using social as some of the tactics that are going to help you predominantly on the front end. And that's what I think gets missed all the time. That's why I was very excited that you all invited me to join the conversation, because I'm so over the people who would have you think that if all you do is sit on LinkedIn, deals roll in. And I don't know about anybody else who's watching or my esteemed panelists, but I have never closed a deal on LinkedIn. I've opened the door to the opportunity, without question, right? Because you can do the networking, the prospecting, and you can create visibility and start engaging with people and do all those sorts of things that get you the opportunity to have a sales conversation. But if you're not able to have the conversation, ask the right questions, as John said, and we could have a very long conversation about even the younger folks coming in who are not getting training. Many of them resist even making a phone call. They want to try and do it over technology, and that just doesn't fly. So no, I don't think it's a fancy term for marketing, but I also think it's not the be-all, end-all of selling either. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I hear the same thing, social. I mentioned earlier that I'm involved with companies, different sizes, large companies and small companies, helping them be more effective selling. There's absolutely no question that social is growing. It's taking a big part in certain segments, certain industry sectors, technology being one for sure, telecommunications. As John mentioned earlier, financial services, heavy equipment manufacturers tend to lag with their adoption of social as a component of buying, which means if you're selling to them, back your foot off the accelerator pedal just a bit. But the important thing for me to get across is that if you're going to go social, obviously John and Barb and I, not to mention Brian and Rachel, are very well steeped in all this. You can't allow the sales skills, either your basic sales skills or those of your team, if you're a sales manager, fall by the wayside. I just posted on Twitter a link to a blog post I wrote actually a number of years ago, and I borrowed from another blogger, of course gave him full credit, a list of basic selling skills. And if you take a look at that list of basic selling skills, if you're selling and you're trying to replace social for any of these, my sense is that you're not going to close the amount of business that you need to close to make your number. So the social is another layer on top of what we already need to have in terms of capability and competency with respect to selling. It's not a replacement for anything. It's an additional layer. And I think if the more people that understand that, the more they'll sell. That's my view.
We just had a great tweet from Greg Heyer, one of our community friends. He says, social selling holds salespeople accountable to understanding their buyer and building trusting relationships.
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice way of summing it up.
Yes, Rachel, I think that's a great way of summing it up, because what I do think it does is it certainly removes any excuse for you not to know your buyer, not to know what they care about. It gives you a lot more opportunity to be immediate with the value that you create. It gives you a great way of understanding the things that they care about. So it gives you a huge amount, and it is very valuable. But it has to be targeted. It has to be used well, and I think that's where, if you come back to a fundamental selling skill, which I think Barb and Dave are certainly familiar with, the idea of advances versus continuations. And I think that you'll see that a lot of people, when they get involved with social selling, they just get into these continuation cycles where they're having lots of conversations and all that, but it's actually not progressing as a sale. And that's why I always say you should never lose sight of that selling part of social, because some people just get distracted by the social element, and you've got to have a purpose and objective, and you've always got to be moving it forward in some manner.
Yeah, there's no honor. Oh, did you lose me there for a second?
We had a hiccup there for a second, but I think we're back.
Yeah, sorry. So I was saying, I think the element of you can't underestimate the amount of a time suck that social can be if you allow it to be. So I think that's something you definitely have to keep in mind.
Well, I also like John's point that it sort of dovetails what Dave said. Even in those industries like manufacturing, or perhaps it's financial services, that maybe they're not as actively engaged, there's still a ton of information that you can use to gather and get to know them before you reach out and try to secure those meetings. So it still has a great place, I think. You just have to be aware of where, your industry, and again, maybe they're not engaging as much, but you can still do the homework and, beware the sales rep who walks in completely unprepared and demonstrates they've not taken the time to learn about their potential customer.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no excuse for that anymore, especially all the
data. Absolutely.
You just look foolish.
No, and I think that, an interesting one from my perspective, and I have to give a shout out. My dad is actually watching for the first time, and he is the salesperson that's a candy salesman since before I was born, and went on up the chain. And he text messaged me because social is like he's using LinkedIn for his current consulting, but he's not into the Twitters, and he was messaging me like, how do I get on this Google Plus today? But one of the things he text messaged me and said, no matter what you're using, you sell yourself, then the product. And I thought that was an interesting one that I had to plug in there, that not only from that, no matter what the skill or the tool that you're using, I think these basic fundamentals that we're focusing on this chat, and what we've kind of focused the community on are really important. So we'll jump into question 4. What are some common sales mistakes, and why are they continuously occurring? And Dave will give you the honors to jump into this first one here. So what are those common mistakes that you're seeing, and I guess why are they occurring, and how can we stop them from occurring?
Yeah, so we'll go back to what I had said earlier about 2008 when the economy tanked, and companies still sold stuff, maybe not as much as they did, and they still bought stuff, products and services, maybe not as much as they did. But what I think a lot of folks out there, certainly the ones I work with, didn't get the message that it was really more about selling the business value of their products and services than selling the products and services. And to this day, and this has been going on for 50 years or more, somehow the sales profession hasn't entirely figured this out, or how important it is. But if I can tell you, Brian, the specific contribution that my product or service is going to make to your business plan, especially your financial plan, where it's going to have the impact, by how much and by when, that is going to give you more of a reason to buy from me than my competitors who are telling you that my PC is great because when you press the F7 key, it reboots, and all things which have nothing to do with you achieving your plan. So I think this whole dependence on product features and functions and the resumes of my service people and all that really now more than ever since 2008 takes a back seat to talking finally once and for all about specific quantified business value. And I think just a lot of people are missing out on that.
All right, well, I suppose I'll jump in. I completely agree with you, Dave. And Brian, you asked the question, why is it happening? Well, I think because people aren't being trained. The investment in training them in these, what people like to call soft skills, which are really hard skills, the communication, the good questioning, all of it, the process to follow and all of that sort of thing, I don't think it's being taught. I have seen many, many companies, they spend a lot of investment training new people who come into the organization and then who remain with the organization. They'll train them on the internal processes and they go right into training them on the features of the products. And feature dumps, or what I like to call show up and throw up, just doesn't work. And especially if you accept the notion, which hopefully people do by now with enough research to support it, if you accept the notion that buyers are doing their homework online, they've already done that initial homework of research. You don't need to come in and tell them all about how awesome your company is and run through the 55 slide deck with every little feature. You need to be able to demonstrate that you can help solve business problems, and the only way I know to do that is someone needs to train people to learn how to do that, including not even asking questions that you can get the answer to on the web, but maybe you validate information, but you don't start with who keeps you up at night. We are well past that time, right? The information's available. I can't imagine a CEO or a senior executive wanting to take time to educate the salesperson who didn't bother to do a little homework themselves. So I think companies need to be making a lot more investment in the learning and development side of it to make sure that these sales skills are really stellar.
Yeah, I obviously coming out of that industry, sales training, and we're all in it to some degree, or where it is mind-blowing. And if you take a step back, if you look at every college or university in the States and pretty much around the world, nearly all of them will have a marketing program of one kind or another. But you will only find a tiny fraction that have a sales program, and that's where the problem often starts, is that sales is not viewed as the profession it is from the get-go, and then people come into their jobs, and the salespeople, they get often the least training of all people, that in the organization. It's often the people in the council get more training than the salespeople will, because they're just expected to improvise, and obviously that's where bad habits come in. So I agree 100%. I think there are so many mistakes that are still happening in sales, and they're happening because the people don't get good training and ongoing training, because it's not just train once, it's, as we talked about, the buyer's changing, so how you approach selling should be changing as well. And there's one other thing, that as a salesperson, if you can get, the first rule of communication is that people value conclusions they come to themselves above anything that you'll ever say to them. So part of your job as a salesperson is really to convince you to the point where you come to the conclusion that, yes, this is something I need. And that takes skill, and like we said, that's not something that you can develop overnight. That's something that needs to be trained and coached and mentored. So if we really looked at sales as a proper profession and really invested in coaching, training, and mentoring, we'd have far less problem with sales.
Yeah, we had some, John, I think you hit home when you said, the training cannot be a one-time occurrence. I came from training in technology side, and every time someone would say, well, Brian, we're excited you're here. We know that technology keeps changing. And my reply back was, well, have you trained anybody new? And they would say, well, when they got onboarded on the company, they were trained. Like, oh, so has anything changed since they were onboarded? Or, is it the same exact experience? And there's a couple tweets that, one of them that I saw a lot, closing too fast or not closing at all, and thinking about the automatic approach instead of actually, coming through the process of building that relationship, connecting. But then taking that relationship and making the sale. I think, you know, we often hear build a relationship, have conversations, but at some point you have to make the sale, or you're just spinning your wheels and, you know, going down that road. So I think the idea of continual training cannot be overstressed enough when we're talking about the new change, new technology, new devices, new CRM systems that are connected to social signals. Well, if you don't know what social signals are, what does that new CRM have any value for your solution?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think another big sales mistake, quite honestly, is using social channels to broadcast spam. Can you please just knock it off? Right? These irrelevant sales pitches. You know, I had to blog about this because I got one a couple of days ago, and the subject line was, Barbara, I like your profile. Can we connect? And the entire message was then a sales pitch. Well, no, I'm not going to connect with you, and that's a completely inappropriate way to go about it. So that's, you know, that's a big sales mistake too. I realize that your spam emails are not getting you traction, but you're just going to make it worse if you come over to social channels and broadcast. You need to really customize and tailor your messaging if you really hope to get to the end goal, which I think for most people is to secure that meeting. So, you know, and not being patient, right? Somebody said closing too fast. So you've got to be a little bit patient. You have to work through the process. One email with a sales pitch is not going to get you the meeting as a general rule unless you are extremely compelling. But most aren't, right? It's just, let me tell you all about my company and how great I am and what I can sell you. And that's just not the way to go about it. I mean, people still buy from people they know, like, and trust. So I think you need to put the time in to build those relationships. And honestly, guys, I'd be curious to know what everybody else thinks, but I don't think that's any different than it's ever been. I'm not sure why people think social channels are some shortcut that's going to be the nirvana to get one connection, one contact, and then a big sale. It just, you know, it takes time. It takes work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just add one thing to that is that if just like Barb said about those broadcast or pitchy emails or whatever, you know, once upon a time you could screw up in front of one prospect in a face-to-face meeting or on the phone, and you know, perhaps you could get away with that, learn from that, and they maybe tell a couple of people about it. But now, if you go online, you're just exponentially exposing yourself to the world and your poor practices, and you're decredentialing yourself and the organization you work for. So you got to be really careful.
So I have a question for the panel. I know we touched on training and how important it is for companies to invest in their salespeople, but how much ownership is on the individual salesperson to stay up with trends and tactics? Because I feel like they blame the company easily, but a lot of it is you need to be constantly reading and educating yourself, in my belief, anyway.
I think you're right on, Rachel. I can't. I've spent thousands of dollars all through the years. I never waited for, you know, when I worked for corporate companies, I never waited for the company to invest in my learning and development. I took it upon myself to do that. And actually, I think the sales rock stars do that. I think the really good sellers know that they're going to invest books, audio tapes. Oh my gosh, look at all the complimentary education that's available to them, including what we're doing here today. So in my opinion, you don't wait for your company, because if you're waiting for your company to train you, that says to me that you don't have an interest in really driving forward the success of your own career. Just my opinion.
There's a interesting thing that happened at ESR. I suspected for a long time that 50 or 60% of sales leaders and sales managers and VPs of sales were what we commonly call right-brained, as opposed to logical, disciplined, serial-oriented thinkers. And so we did a little survey at ESR about 4 years ago asking, I don't remember the exact number, it might have been 500 or 600 salespeople, which career, what number career they were in now if they were selling. Not how many sales jobs they had, how many careers they had been through. The average number was just under 4. just under 4. So many salespeople, they wound up in sales because we believed, and we never did any scientific research on this, but we believe that they're right-brain thinkers, fine people, as intelligent as anyone else, but they don't necessarily think logically. They're not into following process. They're not necessarily disciplined. They depend on their intelligence, on their gut feel. Well, if the sales population is 50 to 60% filled with these fine, right-brained, creative thinkers, some of them are very successful, they wind up in sales management positions, then they're going to propagate the same type of thing that's been going on, and that is hiring more right-brained sales types who have the gift of gab, strong personalities, are charismatic, and don't necessarily are not necessarily interested in doing all the hard work that's required to consistently sell year after year after year. Very interesting to think about that.
It's interesting. I think it's also interesting to see, we talk about culture change, and you always talk about, you hear people talking about you have to hire for your culture, but you also have to fire to your culture. And and those people that aren't fitting into the culture or don't understand that logic or aren't willing to get on board and understand that there's an element of teamwork where that collaboration does have to work with marketing and does have to work with to understand the story and customer experience. There's so many of those things that if you're not willing to do that, you do have to kind of hire and fire. And one of the comments I saw on Twitter I wanted to pull in, Kyle Lacey said, your customer is your best salesperson. Allow them to help tell your story. And I thought that's kind of spot on, kind of what you guys are explaining here as well, because not only the importance of the customer experience, but also if you think you know what your story is and the customer is telling you something different, the customer's right. Even though it's not Burger King, the customer's right in that case where they know what your story is, and it's your job then to kind of take the next step. So we have question 5 here. If sales was easy, everyone would be doing it. So what is the future of sales? I always like the future of sales. And we're not going to say 5 years from now because we are lucky to know a year from now what will be going on or 6 months. So we're going to say, what is the future as in the near future of sales as you guys see it?
Well, there was a move back to 2008 again. A lot of VPs of sales decided that they were going to take their direct salespeople and put them in a room and make them inside salespeople. And the inside function, often they tried to put it online. Of course, a lot of this was done in a reactive way rather than strategically. But I think in the short term, what's going to happen is lower end sales, meaning smaller ticket items, more of that will go online. More of the direct sales will go to inside sales, and that will obviously result in the reduction of the number of professional salespeople, certainly here in the U.S. But when you're selling $7 billion worth of Boeing 777s to Singapore Airlines, there is always going to be a professional business/salesperson who is doing what's required to get that deal. And it's not just $7 billion. It could be $1 billion or $50 million or $5 million. I think there's always going to be a place for the business-oriented professional salesperson. That's my take anyway.
Yeah, and I would add that I think the successful professional salesperson of the current and immediate future, I think there are 3 things that are going to be really critical, and I think one of them is that, as we talked about, is that they've got very good research skills, because you need to research your target buyer, go online, understand about them. So use social in a very productive way to understand your buyer. So I think research skills are really incredibly important. I think they also have to have some micro-marketing skills, because I think communicating now in concise ways and being able to communicate value through the written word is very, very important as well, given that some of your engagement is going to be virtual. And then the third thing that I just think is business acumen. Is you can't get away without business acumen anymore. And when once upon a time salespeople, a lot of them could have a very kind of superficial understanding of how business operated, I think now today you have to really understand top and bottom line of your target customer. You got to understand what's going on in their business, and you've got to be able to bring some value and insight to that. And if you don't have business business acumen and understand how business operates and how your customer's business operates, you're not going to be able to do that. So that's what I'd say: researcher, micro marketer, and business acumen.
Well, I happen to agree with both of you, and I'm going to throw out kind of a wacky idea. So for one, I'm really glad that Dave mentioned, we're always going to need salespeople. I mean, for a while there, people were kicking around that by 2020, 80% of salespeople would no longer be needed, and I just don't believe it's going to be that high of a percentage. But to Dave's point, I really do agree that some lower level, smaller deal types that don't require a lot of consultative selling, perhaps will probably the transaction will probably happen online. But to John's point, I think it could be interesting. I think we could see superstar salespeople who are kind of like free agents, and they may not necessarily work for just one company. Right? They're a superstar, so they might actually have several companies who hire them to come in and close or put together and close those mega deals. So I know it's a little bit of a radical idea, but I think it's very possible that somebody, right?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think we play the evangelist idea where marketing is now almost having these evangelists for hire is what I've been calling it, where you have someone that understands the story, the product, the community, and they're like the influencer that is not only living and doing it, but they're also connected to the brand. And I could see that as like I haven't thought of it before that way, but I think that you're onto something there. I think we could almost have that sales evangelist that is living and acting the day-to-day customer experience, and then them kind of taking on, hey, this is the person you're going to come to as that influence, but also connected to the brand.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I think there's a real possibility that could happen, and the salespeople who have the kind of skill set to make that work, wow, are you kidding me? They're going to be able to command any price they want, right? And companies that they're going to be willing to pay because they're going to need that type of expertise, recognizing that maybe everyone in their own sales force isn't going to be able to embody some of the skill sets that they need. So it could be interesting. So we'll see in a couple of years. We'll see. Was she right or was she just wacky?
Or have you become that person wandering around the country selling for everyone and raking in the big bucks?
Maybe so.
I think you're onto something there. Sign me up. All right, so we have about 12 minutes left. This is great. The Twitter is kind of blowing up. We have Greg Wilson had a really good answer for that 5. He said people will always rely on people. They may be fewer and they may not all be out in the field selling, but that won't be automated. And I think I always laugh that you can't blame automation, or you can't use the excuse of automation if you don't customize. I love and embrace technology and automation, but you must customize and tailor that. I can't stand. I get a tweet that says, "Hey Brian, we would love for you to use this product." I wrote a blog post and comment about that software on a weekly basis, and I had a salesperson hit me up and act like they had never even, they could have Googled my name or my Twitter handle and that product, and they would have probably got 30 results, and instead they insulted me by saying, we would love for you to try our product. Like that, to me, there's no excuse for that today. The data, the information, social listening is there. So for question 6, what does that sales management need to know to not only do, but to enable effective selling? Because I think part of that comes down to management. It has to be trained just as much as the sales team, because it's a different type of skill set, it's different measurement techniques. So how do you guys look at that from from that sales management perspective?
Well, I'll jump in here. I think there are 3 things, and the first is just going to be a repetition of what Barb and John, what we've all been talking about, and that is understanding your customer, how your customer buys, and understanding your customer's business. And until salespeople and sales teams really apply themselves to that, again, successful selling is just not going to happen. The second we touched on a bit, but I want to drive it home and make sure everybody understands how important hiring the right people, how important that is. The past success does not does not predict future success. Somebody, for example, who may have made $1 million a year selling enterprise software for Oracle year after year after year after year, they decide they don't want to be in the rat race anymore. Not that Oracle's a rat race, but they don't want to be in that anymore. They don't necessarily want the big company environment. Maybe they want to get shares and be part of a smaller company. All of a sudden now they're applying for a position as the first salesperson in a small tech startup, and they fall flat on their face. So you want to make sure you're hiring the right people, and that's easily determined. You speak to your customers and you figure out what are the skills and what are the traits that a customer requires from a salesperson to buy from that salesperson. And once you figure that out and you profile that, then you hire salespeople who match up as closely as possible to that profile. And the last part, or the third, it's certainly not the last, this oversimplified list, is train them. Even the best salespeople, I've seen some absolutely home run hitters, whatever you want to call them, over the years, and whether they're out there themselves, as Barb suggested, doing their own learning at their own expense, or whether their companies are providing them with the guidance and the learning and the skills and the behaviors that they need to be successful. That learning has to take place, and they have to be certified in those skills. It's important for the company to realize, I'm going to train them and I'm going to certify them to make sure before they go out to the customer that they can do what it is they've been taught to do. So I think it's a three-legged stool, and I think those are the three legs, or at least the three main legs.
Yeah, I think those are really great points, Dave. And what I will add to the discussion is, I think, especially from a social point of view, management needs to get involved. They need to learn how social works. They need to model and model the way, right, and then help mentor and coach their salespeople. It's kind of hard to ask your sales folks to be using social channels as another part of their sales process when managers aren't doing it, right? So I think that is critically important. And then the next thing I'd like to see management considering is changing the focus of what they measure. So in other words, don't measure whether or not somebody makes 100 phone calls a day. Start to measure whether or not they're calling the right people. Because what happens is, if somebody knows they have to hit 100 phone calls, they're going to just call anybody that they can dial, right? And I think the same goes for email. So I'd like to see management start changing the actual activities that they measure. Because it's interesting to me. A lot of times leaders will ask me, well, what about the return on investment with social? I don't want my people playing around on Facebook all day. And yet, I have almost never seen an organization measure the effectiveness of the offline networking events that salespeople might go to. And so they can run around to a lot of events and they can convince themselves they're actually doing something that's leading, forwarding and advancing that sale, but they're not. So I'd like to see focus on, looking at the right activities and starting to measure the things that really matter, right, that are going to lead to sales.
And I think that's kind of, that's like a spot on. I know in my company how I got over, I was building a social selling team, and one of my ways that I got over this, what is your social selling ROI question, was it was great because we had sponsored a golf outing the weekend before, and I said, well, what was our social ROI? What was our ROI of our 22 sales guys sitting on the 18th green that that were at that? And they just looked at me. I'm like, so what documentation? Because they wanted documentation for my team, and I was like, okay, so we killed that argument. Now let's talk about relationships. And one of the other things I thought was kind of important was, I was doing some exit interviews, and a lot of people that were, David kind of hit your exact spot. They came from large enterprises. They were coming to our startup, and one of the things that hit home for me is they said, I was so used to taking orders, I forgot about what it was like to sell for a startup. And I was like, to me, that I remember writing that down for 5 or 6 exit interviews. How do you guys think of that element of it, where the game is a little bit different now than just that, going in and getting another SQL license at 100,000, nodes at $100,000. That isn't the same as going to a startup and really, doing the selling thing from that angle.
Well, it's not, but the other thing too, the only other thing I would add to that, Brian, is that, think about it. In Dave's example, he talked about that Oracle rep who was so successful. Well, guess what? If you work for Oracle or Apple or SAP or Microsoft, the company name on that business card has a lot to do with whether or not you get that meeting. So, John, I know you had something to say, but it just also jumped into my mind that I think people forget that sometimes that brand is what's helping get you in the door. And when you go to a company that's not as well established, that's a lot tougher to have to come in and do that evangelism and get people to pay attention to what you offer.
Yeah, I was going to say that the boom years of the mid 2000s, like up to 2008 or whatever, when the recession kicked in, I think they spoiled a lot of people, and a lot of people during that period thought, hey, I'm the greatest salesperson ever because I'm crushing my quota. But everybody had tons of budget. People were buying stuff that they didn't even need, and the reality is really bitten now, because I talk to some sales leaders who'd go, I don't know what's happened to my sales team. They used to be so great and now they're struggling. And I'd say to them, well, did you know, do you know, could they ever sell? Because in those days it was pretty easy. And that's where I always kind of bring the distinction. I say that's the difference between business development and order taking. Because Brian, as you're pointing out, you come to a startup, you're doing business development because you're developing that stuff from scratch, and you're out there really trying to develop a book of business for yourself and sell. It's a lot different from walking in with your Microsoft Oracle card and having a book of business handed to you. So it's a really different skill set, and it's a lot tougher now. And I do think people got spoiled during the boom years, and now a lot of them have realized that actually selling is very hard, and business development, it can be a grind, but it's something to do if you're going to be successful.
No, I think it's probably a really good topic for a future social selling hour, is really the business development angle, and really what biz dev things you can do with social to allow you to show off your sales skills maybe on that offline or that first meeting. Because I like to think that social does a great job of being the icebreaker, building the relationship, either killing or building credibility, depending on how well or how bad. That's the nice thing. If you screw up in a bar, hopefully that bar is as far as it goes. You screw up online, it lives there forever. So I think that's something we also have to worry about teaching. But I can tell you, Twitter has been going about as fast as I can read. So as good as I like to claim my multitasking skills are, thankfully Rachel's been responding, retweeting, and commenting. And we have a couple more minutes. We have like 3 more minutes left of today's social selling hour, and this has been a great panel. So we don't have another question for you, but I guess a closing remark from each person, kind of giving us a little, not only your insight or what maybe you see, but where would maybe a tip. One tip that you would love, that if someone was here and they could only remember one thing, maybe it's because I talk too fast, but they could only remember one thing from today's social selling hour, what's the one takeaway you would love for them to hit? And so we'll do ladies first, Barbara, so I'll throw it to you.
All right, so, I'm going to be repetitious. No shortcuts. That's the one thing, right? No shortcuts. You need to keep up in the sales skills. Social is part of it. Have your plan, work your plan, but continue to invest and make sure that you are keeping those sales skills sharp. And really, that is the one thing. There are no shortcuts. If there were, we'd have people who were tremendously successful as sellers. And as we know, a lot of sellers are not as successful as they could be. And I think part of it is because they try to rush the process. So that's my one thing.
And I go back and repeat mine as well, is just start off, know your target buyer, know who your customer is, go out and talk to them and figure out if their buying process has changed, how much it's changed, and how well aligned, to Dave's original point, how well aligned you are with their buying process as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, and just a variation on what John said, sell to your customer the way that they want to buy. If you want to sell to them the way that you want to sell, there'll be a disconnect and somebody else will walk away with the order.
All right, we'll throw it to Rachel. Rachel, what is your closing last ones there, as you are triple multitasking with Twitter and our chat feed as well?
I'm not sure I necessarily have a tip, but I am just amazed at the quality of tweets we've got in the stream right now. It's I love our community. So many smart people. Let me find a particularly tweetable quote. Let's see here. I was really enjoying, we have a new person, Victor, who's coming out with Victor Garcia, some great tweets, and also Gemma Davies, she stepped out of a Dreamforce keynote to participate, and her answer for question 6 was great. She said companies need to empower and trust employees to choose the right methods and channels for their target audience. And I think that goes back to what John was saying. You really need to know your target audience, and without that, you're wasting your time on social or any sales activity.
No, that's a great way to end it. We are right on the 2 o'clock mark here in Arizona on my side. So first of all, I thank our guests, our panelists, not only for being guests by yourselves through over the last 21 weeks, but also coming on as a panel. And really, this was partially run by Dave, kind of organizing the thought leaders here and bringing the topic together. And that's really what Rachel and I kind of started this community about. It's really getting the voice of the community and getting people that are really doing the work out there to educate the wide vast of people. And I can honestly say my younger brother, who works in audio video, jumped in the Twitter feed and was watching, and my dad's watching and texting. So I can tell you that the vast,
all the fans.
That's great.
The vast reach of the community here is not only exciting, but I think it's the future for us. So we will be here again, same channel, same time next week. Social Selling Hour, the hashtag SShour throughout the week. We always are replying and jumping on the tweets on that side. And once again, thank you to the community. We'll jump in and answer, reply to some of these tweets and get some future topics together. So with that, we will see you next week. Thanks again, panelists. And
thank you.
Thanks, Brian and Rachel.
Yeah, thanks,
guys.
guys.
Have a good week.